3 centuries after the first discoveries, Egypt continues to fascinate us. Every month that goes by reveals new treasures buried under the desert sand. This fragment of nose was found in the area during an archaeological date, so it was stuck back on it, hadn't gone far. Temples, pyramids, necropolises, and ancient cities are just some of the wonders that bear witness to the splendor of past pharaohs and their heirs. The Greeks used to make cakes called pyramids. When they came to Egypt, they found colossal stone structures in the shape of their cakes, so they gave them the same name. This ancient civilization, which was thought to have been lost, is constantly reinventing itself in the Egypt of the 21st century. We are going to travel through time and space to rediscover it. On the north coast of Egypt lies Rosetta, where the Nile flows into the Mediterranean Sea. At the end of its 7,000-kilometer-long journey, which starts in the heart of Africa, it was in the city that the key to the culture of the pharaohs was discovered. In 1799, the Rosetta Stone helped French Egyptologist Jean-François Champollion uncover the mystery of hieroglyphs. From then on, archaeologists could read ancient Egyptians like an open book, and they discovered that the Nile was far more than just a river. The pharaoh subjects worshipped it, celebrated it, and associated it with numerous deities. The Nile and its delta have been the country's greatest asset since the dawn of time. Without this life force, Egypt would be merely a vast and sterile expanse of desert. Upstream from the delta, the Nile is a majestic river. On its banks lies the current capital, Cairo, founded by the Arabs in the 7th century. Today, the river must wind its way as best as it can through this megalopolis of 16 million inhabitants. It is a sprawling city which stretches almost as far as the Giza pyramids today. These wonders of the ancient world lie kilometers from the riverbank, but in the days of the pharaohs, the Nile flowed right past them. That was how the millions of blocks of stone needed to build these colossal 4,500-year-old structures were transported. To gain a better understanding of the role and the importance of the Nile in Egypt's 4,000-year-old culture, we must go further upstream to the south, where it is the shape of a green snake, winding its way through the hostile deserts. In Luxor, on the site of the ancient city of Thebes, the river has always governed the daily life of the locals. The river traffic is dense there. Egypt is a big country, and the Nile covers a distance of 1,200 kilometers. The river remains the natural link between north and south. You find all sorts of boats on it, from modest dinghies used by local residents to cruise ships transporting hundreds of tourists who have come here to visit the wonders of the ancient heritage sites, such as Luxor Temple. For example, there is one boat which causes a sensation every time it passes, and it has been doing so for 100 years, and that's the legendary Palal steamer, Sudan. You are on board the oldest and most unique boat in the night. This boat was built in 1885 for the Egyptian royal family, for King Fuad and his son for Real, who became the last king of Egypt. This was Agatha Christie's boat. In 1934, she and her husband were invited to spend a few days in Egypt. She began her stay in the old Winter Palace Hotel in Knoxville. Then she boarded the Paddle Seaman, Sudan, and ended her trip in the old Cataract Hotel in Aswan. While she was on board, Agatha Christie wrote the first few chapters of her book, Death on the Nile. Since the 19th century, the Western world has had a fascination for Egypt, to the extent that we talk about Egyptomania. And when Agatha Christie set a novel, Death on the Nile, amongst Egyptian antiquities, she knew its success was guaranteed. The 30-kilometer-long mountain chain opposite Luxor helped contribute to the craze for all things Egyptian. In it lies a site which captured everyone's imagination, the Theban necropolis. Archaeologists have uncovered over 600 tombs here, the most famous of which of those of Tutankhamun and Nefertiti, the wife of Ramesses II. But each year, the passes brings a new set of discoveries. Omaima has explored every nook and cranny of these desert valleys. This was her childhood dream. She fulfilled it when she became an Egyptologist, specializing in the Theban necropolis. We are in front of the tomb of Rekhmire, who was a vizier during the reign of Tuk. Most the third viziers were a bit like modern-day prime ministers, so he was a very important man. Here, we have a whole wall decorated with scenes showing the Egyptian people bringing gifts to Rek Mirror. You can see all sorts of things: herds of oxen, cows, calves, crates full of pigeons, piles of grain, jars of beer and wine. There are also trays of bread. These round loaves are typical of Egypt, and you still find them today. They are called shamsi, which means sun bread, because they are left out in the sun to rise. They are dense, wholemeal loaves. This shows us the riches that came from the Nile, from the silt of the Nile, and from its floodwaters, from this green band of water, this green snake, which is the lifeblood of Egypt. Without the Nile, Egypt would not exist and would never have existed. We wouldn't be here today. 96% of Egypt's population of 100 million still lives on the banks of the Nile. On both sides of the river lies fertile agricultural land. The water from the Nile has always been diverted, channeled and harnessed for irrigation purposes. To water their crops, ancient Egyptians used ashadu. This was a tool with a leader mechanism used to draw water from the river by hand. Shaddus was still in use in the late 20th century. Today, they have been replaced by pumps, which are more practical but less environmentally friendly. Jabril, like his ancestors, helps himself to water from the river to water his corn fields. Gas here, the only source of water, is denial. That's why we're lucky to live near the river. It depends on the season, but we need a lot of water for our crops from here right up to the sugarcane fields near the desert. Everything is irrigated by the Nile. That's a distance of about 5 kilometers. The Nile is the lifeblood of Egypt. Because we are a very agricultural nation, the river is what matters most to us. There is a famous saying that Egypt is a gift from an eye. And it's true. At Ghana, the town opposite Luxor, the benefits of the Nile are felt as far as the desert. Every plot of land is cultivated. Some are too small for a tractor, so farmers like Muhammad use an ancient technique, the swing plow. A cloud is better than a tractor. The tires tempt down the soil tube. If a tractor were to drive over here, there would be lots of soil with nothing growing in it. It's better to use oxygen. Oh, God. We inherited this technique from our ancestors. It's a technique which dates back to the time of the pharaohs. The ancient Egyptians used their plow pulled by oxen. I can see images on some of the tombs around here. The swing plow hasn't changed since antiquity. The ancient Egyptians did not use iron. The plowshare was made of wood. Nowadays, it is made of metal. But the biggest difference between now and then is today's farmers own their land, whereas the whole of Egypt used to belong to the pharaoh. This is our legacy, so we look after it. Before he died, my father said to me, "This plow will bring you luck." I asked him why. He replied, "If you have a small plot of land surrounded by fields, you can use the plow to work the land without disturbing your neighbors. Then they will pray for you, 'cause you were careful with that crops." And he was right. That is important. In the distance, behind the fields of corn and sugarcane, lies the Theban mountain with its necropolis. The inhabitants of Jerna rarely venture that far. Only a few of them have found work there, more often than not, as tomb attendants. Yet, not long ago, their village stood in that spot. Living in close proximity to the dead didn't seem to bother their ancestors. In the 19th century, an archaeologist who came here found the owner of the house sleeping in a sarcophagus in a coffin. Thousands of people lived in the village, and sadly, few years ago it was razed to the ground to preserve the site. In the 1950s, the authorities decided to destroy what people here call Old Ghana. Traces of the village can be seen all over the site, but it is in the tomb of Karuv that you really get a feel for the intense activity that went on here back when the living rubbed shoulders with the dead. Karuv was the steward of Ter, the great, royal wife of Amenhotep III, a mother of the famous Akhenaten kid at home. This tomb is very beautiful, but it is not only tourists. An archaeologist who thinks so, come and see, sit down. This network of underground galleries is like a Swiss cheese. I'm not suggesting that mice have been here, but humans have. The inhabitants of Old Garner searching for buried treasure. Tomb robbers definitely used to live down here. You can see dark patches on the ceiling from the soot that built up here over the years. You can just imagine these men searching, holes here and there. This one, for example. Thanks to the robbers, we can pass from one tomb to the next throughout the whole of Old Garner. All that remains of Old Garner are these ruins. But life goes on. Opposite the ruins, New Garner is celebrating a very important local event this evening, a wedding. At weddings, it is traditional for people to come and greet the bride and groom, and to perform a dance them on horseback, as you can see here. The family and friends of the two families pay their respects in the afternoon, and the wedding ceremony takes place the next day, or the day after. Ancient Egyptians did not ride horses. It was only when they fought the Hyksos from Anatolia in the 16th century BC that they discovered this wonderful animal. The first horses were a very small breed, only about 1.2 meters tall. It was impossible to mount them, so they had to be harnessed to a chariot. Rameses, the second chariot, was an excellent example. He would drive his horses with the reins tied around his waist, to leave his hands free to shoot his bow and arrow. Throughout ancient Egyptian history, horses remained a luxury and one of the most formidable weapons of the pharaoh's army. With the arrival of the Arabs in the 7th century and their equestrian tradition, horses became what they are now in Garner, a son of wealth and a masculine pride. It is just in Garner, the time when the town comes alive in these ordinarily calm streets. Music fills the air on a patio away from prying eyes. The men are continuing the wedding celebrations. The horse is still the guest of honor. Only this time the rider has to show off his skills as a trainer. The horses dance alongside the men to the rhythm of tambourines and mismars, which are an early form of trumpet. No parties complete in Egypt without a stick fight or tartabi. This is an ancient tradition that comes from training for pharaoh soldiers. This martial arts has very precise rules that were established in about 3200 BC. It is still practiced today. The first of the two fighters to graze the face of his opponent is declared the winner. Contact must remain symbolic, and the fight must be simulated. Over the centuries, tartary became more of a dance than a fight, shifting from a military register to a martial arts, when thanks to the practice of local farmers. In the early hours of the morning, the wedding celebrations are still in full swing. The men are starting to show signs of tightness through the smoke from their shitches. Every morning, hot air balloons fly over the ancient site of Thebes. When the winds are favorable, lucky passengers get to see the biggest ancient temple of all, Karnak. It is home to one of the most important gods in ancient Egypt, Ammon. Only priests can enter every day. They lay offerings in front of Ammon's statue, food to give him the energy he needed to unite the universe. But his energy is contagious, so Karnak has high walls to protect the uninitiated from contamination. For ancient Egyptians, Karnak was the equivalent of a nuclear power station, and the god Ammon was the nuclear reactor. It was a useful place, but a dangerous one. We are now standing on the famous Sphinx Alley, a 3-kilometer-long road linking Karnak and Luxor. This was the processional route taken by Ramesses II for the celebration of the Feast of Opet during the second month of the Nile floods in the inundation season. The Feast of Opet is one of the most important festivals in ancient Egypt. It celebrates the start of the Nile floods. This was the only time in the year when the priests would bring out statues of the gods. It was also the only opportunity for ancient Egyptians to see Ammon. The god must be united with his wife, but the pharaoh is present because he is the only person able to communicate directly with Ammon. The union between Mut and Ammon symbolizes fertility because the silk deposited by the river fertilizes vast areas of Egyptian soil every year. I'm standing on Egyptian soil that dates back to 11 to 12 BC, era of Ramesses II. But if you look at the lower part of the mosque, at the level of the door, that was built in the 12th century AD, so 2,500 years later, or a bit less even, because the temple was still in use in Roman times. So less than 1,000 years later, this part of the temple was covered in mud 6 meters deep, clearing the temple led to a rediscovery of this jewel of ancient Egypt. But the original entrance to the mosque had to be ditched, and then transformed into a window with an unrestricted view of the great court of Ramesses II. In ancient Egypt, the floods marked the start of the calendar year. As with so many events at the time of the pharaohs, the date was decided by the Nile 150 kilometers upstream at the temple of Kom-Ombo. The proof is etched into the stone for anyone who knows how to read hieroglyphs. Sameh certainly does. He is a Copt. This Christian community was present in Egypt long before the Arab conquest in 640 AD. Copts are direct descendants of ancient Egyptians. Sameh owes his passion for Egyptology to his desire to gain a better understanding of his origins. Part of the answer is to be found on the walls of Colombo in the form of this perfectly preserved calendar. The dates were dictated by the Nile and its caprices, and the calendar is still used by the Coptic Church and by many Egyptians. The same calendar is still followed by farmers in Egypt, and it is also the liturgical calendar of the Coptic Church. Ancient Egyptians invented this 365-day calendar, or to be exact, this 360-day calendar, plus 5 feast days at the end of the year. The 365 days are divided into 12 months of 30 days each, and the 12 months were spread over 3 seasons: the inundation, the emergence, and the harvest. The ancient Egyptian calendar started in mid-July, around the time of the Nile floods. Let me show you an example. This is the first day of the 3rd month of the season of the inundation, and this is the 2nd day, and the 3rd day, and so on. This is the calendar we've inherited. Modern-day calendars have 365 days a year, so they were invented by the ancient Egyptians. The Nile has always organized the lives of Egyptians down to the smallest details. But in addition to being a life force, the river is synonymous with danger. And at the time of the pharaohs, anything that represented a threat was turned into a deity. Common Bao is the house of Sabak, the god with the head of a crocodile. He is the protector of the Nile, but he is also a troublemaker who had to be appeased at all costs. At Colombo, archaeologists found hundreds of crocodile mummies, proof of an ancient cult. Quite a few crocodile remains were found in the necropolis. Some of them are huge, very important. The ancient Egyptians didn't deify or worship the whole species, just an individual crocodile chosen according to specific criteria, and that crocodile was considered to be a living god. It was pampered and fed honey pastries. It was presented with crowns and flowers. It really was treated like a god. Then when it died, it was mummified like a god. The Nile used to be full of crocodiles, and it was dangerous for Egyptians to bathe in it back then, given how many of them were lurking in its waters. Today, there are hardly any crocodiles left on the banks of the Nile, but another animal continues to terrorize and command the respect of locals. This animal can be seen on numerous ancient carvings. It is the cobra, and it acted as a bodyguard to the pharaoh when it was in attack mode. Question you or not. Both, now and then. The best way to spot a cobra is to go to a busy neighborhood and look for a snake charmer, or rather a snake hunter. That is how a Taf makes his living, like his father before him and his father's father before that. He captures unwanted snakes from houses or out in the fields and then trains them to entertain bystanders. It's a very sought-after job, 'cause these snakes end up in people's houses. As soon as people spot one, they call me. I'm the only snake charm left around here. As soon as I catch them, I put them in a basket like this. They live in these baskets until they die. They die of natural causes. I don't kill them. I couldn't do that, obviously. The first thing I do is remove their fangs. Then I put them in front of me like this to get them used to me. Then I start training them. It's very simple. They try to escape. I catch hold of their tail and put them back in front of me until they get used to me and stop trying to escape. I was only bitten once when catching a snake. The bite completely paralyzed my finger, and I had to have surgery on it. My finger remained stuck in this position. I had an operation to straighten it out, and it went back to normal. It was a cobra that did that to me. One like this, the same species, but that one was more aggressive and very wild. Plus, it was much fatter. My problem. That's one of the piece. Wild animals weren't the only danger faced by the ancient Egyptians. The Nile is a capricious river. When the floodwaters got out of control, they destroyed everything in their wake. The Temple of Kambo still bears the scars. temple looks complete, but in action, the front is missing. On this side, you have the outer wall. There is only one door jamb. You have to imagine a door, there, and the outer wall, built of mud bricks, which continued along, that was carried away by the mud, is a blatant example of the balance of the Nile and its floodwaters. Of course, the Nile has a nourishing site, but in the case of severe flooding, can be very destructive the district and dangerous. In times of heavy flooding, the Nile swept up and often destroyed everything in its midst. Sometimes the riverbed didn't return to its original level. It would change on a whim. To protect themselves from the river's worst extremes, the Egyptians would build mud brick walls. Karnak Temple, for example, is surrounded by gigantic dike building. It was a humongous task, which must have taken the pharaohs' brickmakers several centuries to complete. You can see them here with their tools in this bas-relief. To gain a better understanding of the techniques involved, we visit a modern-day brickmaker. Abdullah Salem and his colleagues make bricks, and their methods haven't changed since the time of the pharaohs. The first stage is to mix earth, straw, and water. We pour the mixture into rectangular molds, line them up, and then leave them to dry in the sun. People grow up learning this profession, and when they die, someone else takes up the torch, and history repeats itself. We must protect our heritage, blessing you on the half of Ali. We make between 1,000 and 1,100 bricks a day. Look at these, for example. The first stage is finished. These are unfire bricks, and some people use them like this. Other people prefer fire bricks. It's up to individuals to choose what they want to build their house. In our village, everybody uses own fire bricks because they are much better adapted to our climate. Fire bricks don't fare so well in very hot weather. The Nile floods would mobilize the entire population of Egypt under the pharaohs. It was a constant source of worry. Further south towards the modern city of Aswan, there was an obstacle on the river, the first cataract. This collection of rocks would disappear and reappear depending on the water level. Elephantine Island is one of the biggest islands in the first cataract. To get there, some airports. A traditional Nile riverboat. We are on board a felucca. A felucca is a traditional Egyptian sailing boat. The Nile has been Egypt's main through there since the time of the ancient Egyptians. Sailing was the most comfortable and fastest way to travel. The prevailing wind in Egypt is normally wind which blows the boat against the current. The Nile's current goes from south to north in the opposite direction to the wind, which is what makes it possible to sail in both directions. Elephantine Island was essential for military operations in ancient Egypt. From here, they could watch over the Nile, prevent invasions from the south by boat, and control the ivory trade, after which the island is named. The island isn't just located in an important strategic position, it is also the first point of reference for monitoring the floods. The measuring system pharaohs used remained in place until the 20th century, and can be found all along the river as far north as the delta. We are in a millimeter on Elephantine Island. This millimeter was used until relatively recently to measure flood levels. These are the graduations from the 19th century, the Muslim era, and on the left, you have the graduations from the time of the 3rd. So when the flood waters rose, they flowed in here and gradually filled the millimeter. The priests used these graduations to estimate the force of the floodwater and the speed at which it would rise. If there was too much water, they had to build shelters, and if there was not enough water, they had to dig ponds to retain as much of it as possible. It was a vital and very important role of the king of Egypt to manage the floodwaters of the Nile and to regulate water supplies for the crops. In ancient Egypt, everything was thought to be connected to the deities. If there was a bad flood, it was because Khnu was unhappy. Khnu, with his ram's head, is one of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. His name means master of the water, and he controls the Nile floods. Khnum resides on Elephantine Island, which is the focal point of his kingdom. The first cataract. The cataracts are the rocks, mostly granite, which covered this whole region back in the day. The Nile has carved out a path through them. You have to imagine this region in the season of inundation, with the water swirling between all these rocks. In ancient Egyptian mythology, this was the source of the Nile. If Kanu is the god of the Nile's floods, Hapi was the god of its source. He lives on the riverbed in a cave under the cataract, water spurs out of a jar in his hands. Hapi embodies the benevolent aspect of the Nile. He is portrayed as an androgynous figure with a bust and a belly. Hapi personifies fertility when he is with his double. He represents the link between Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, between the papyrus and the lotus. The Nile's floodwaters no longer reach the first cataract. A few kilometers upstream from Elephantine Island, a concrete and steel monstrosity is blocking the way, bringing this capricious river under control. The Aswan Dam has usurped Kanoem, the god of the floods. At over 4 kilometers long and 111 meters high, the dam is a match for the Great Pyramid, taking up 17 times more space since it was built in 1970. This giant structure has transformed Egypt. Today, Egyptian farmers have 3 harvests a year instead of just 1. But there is a price to pay. Chemical fertilizers have replaced the silt from the floodwaters. Nowadays, the Aswan Dam is a tourist attraction. It is a source of pride for Egyptians and for those who built it. Rosti was just 22 when he was recruited to work on this vast building site. I was here 55 years ago, so you can imagine the feelings I have. Now, you imagine the shape of the environment at that time. You see, this place actually mean at that time. It wasn't clean and marvelous like this. It was hills and valleys of sand and rocks, and all of that damage. This was our offices. We found ourselves on 1960, the beginning of Nadim, and the beginning of what we call it changing the mood of the Egypt itself. Actually from small country to a country which has a goodwill to start building something like the Hittite. That's why I like to talk about Hittite. It's not because an engineering sense, but I'm talking about the psychological meaning about it. The official number of victims was over 500. We had lot of sacrifices. We had lot of people dying on this project actually, but the conclusion, in the end of it, actually, that we are standing there now, seeing that this project is living among all of us. Abdel Karim worked on the dam and survived. He was born and bred in Aswan. At the age of 91, the dam remains the biggest adventure of his life. Long live Egypt! Long live Egypt! Long live Egypt! Now, and talk to you about the dam. When construction started, I was working on a dangerous site. Everything collapsed on top of the workers, and lots of people were killed. Work was halted, and the biggest machines were banned from the site. We had to continue by hand using shovels. It took all our strength to lift the big stones with ropes. Yes, people died. But it was for a good cause, the Aswan Dam. This is the letter that Gamal Abdul Nasser sent me once the dam was finished. It's a thank you letter. I'm proud of my contribution. I'm glad I helped build the Aswan Dam. I did it for Egypt. Upstream from Aswan, the construction of the dam has had a drastic consequence. The creation of Lake Nasser, a vast reservoir of water covering an area of over 500 kilometers, encompassing the entire region of Nubia. After thousands of years in existence, the monuments of Nubia are at risk from flooding. The most prestigious of all these archaeological treasures are the Abu Simbel temples. Richard Lebeau is a French Egyptologist. He found his calling at the age of 14 when he visited the Tutankhamun exhibition in Paris in 1967. Since then, he has traveled to Egypt over 100 times. For Richard, Abu Simbel is still one of the most magical places in the world. In front of you, you have a monumental temple belonging to Ramesses II. It has a 20-meter-high colossus. This was the first time a pharaoh had dared to represent himself as a god. This temple is a miracle. It almost disappeared on the Lake Massa. 42 nations came to the rescue with $36 billion just a week or two before disaster struck. The operation to save the Abu Simbel temples was launched on April 1, 1964. It was a race against the clock for 8 years. 900 people worked on it day in, day out. First, they had to build a dike to protect the site from rising floodwater. Then work is divided Abu Simbel up into 1,035 blocks, each weighing 20 to 30 tons. The 4-seated giants and the 6 other monumental statues were dug out by hand. The most delicate phase could now begin. It involved transporting this giant jigsaw puzzle 64 meters upstream. Jacks, cranes, and extremely powerful winches were used to raise these huge blocks to the top of the cliff. Finally, artificial hills were built to recreate the original setting for the two Abu Simbel temples. This is an extraordinary sight in terms of techniques. Digging up a temple is highly risky and a real challenge. In those days, the world had no concept of universal heritage. It was saving the monuments of Nubia, including the Abu Simbel Temple, which gave rise to UNESCO's famous list of World Heritage Buildings. The first building on that list was Abu Simbel. This is the second temple of Abu Simbel, the one. Ramesses is the second, dedicated to his famous wife, Nefertiti. In addition to being a devoted lover, Ramesses II was a great politician. He knew that the prosperity of Egypt depended on his domination of Nubia. And at the bottom of this inscription that you see here, he is presented as the master of Nubia today, and always too. Nubia was an important region of the pharaohs. It is rich in gold mines and ivory, and African slaves passed through here. The trouble was that the Nubians were inclined to rebel as soon as they got the chance. The pharaohs from northern Egypt tried everything to pacify this rebellious region. This is a column of prisoners, their hands tied behind their back and on their knees. These people are easily identifiable by their Negro traits. The significance of this frieze, which was on the outside of the temple, was to show Egyptians that the Nubians have been conquered, and that this defeat would affect them throughout history until the end of time. This World Heritage Site was saved, but the Nubian population was forgotten. There was no sign of the paradise NASA had promised them after construction of the dam, and 100,000 of them were displaced in the village of Abu Simbel. Behind the artificial hills sheltering the temples, a few traces of this ancient culture can still be found. Fikri does all he can to preserve it. He wants you to sing about this lost paradise. Now, he is trying to preserve remnants of it. I am part of the last generation to have experienced Nubia. Back in the day, I used to play in front of the temples of Abu Simbel. When the facade stretched down towards the river, we would travel by felucca from our village on the opposite bank. We would come here to the temples to play. I have happy memories of it. The whole of Nubia was here. That was the village of Abu Simbel, one of the 44 villages in Nubia, which stretched from the border with Sudan down to Aswan. The 44 villages in Nubia were dotted all along the Nile Valley. The landscape you see today, between looks, and as one remains more or less unchanged, just had more palm trees. There used to be millions of palm trees here, but they have all disappeared 60 meters beneath the lake. No one can imagine what it was like. Today it is deserted. There is a lake here now, but life was different then. There were feluccas on the Nile. That life has completely disappeared under the lake. UNESCO hasn't done much to save it, nor has the Egyptian government or anybody else. If we don't try to save God, this part of our culture, it will disappear forever. Nubian culture is at risk of disappearing, and yet it has lasted for centuries. In particular, the architecture, with its domes and vaults designed especially to withstand the heat of the desert. The music is a reflection of the people too. Some of the instruments are straight out of the pharaonic era. It done, leave you with a year, 6 feet on me. Lord, if eaten Tigia, we don't need. Should I go carry? Oh, saint. Modern day Egypt has made the pharaoh's wish come true to bring the Nile under control, whatever the price. Most Egyptians have had to adapt despite coming from the delta. These fishermen at Lake Nasser look as if they've been here forever. However, a new element has appeared in the heart of the African continent. Ethiopia has also built a dam over Nile. The Ethiopians can now control the flow of the river too, so the Egyptians are not the only masters of the Nile. This represents a new challenge for the country where since the time of the pharaohs, the Nile has been synonymous with Egypt, and Egypt has been synonymous with the Nile. 3 centuries after the first discoveries, Egypt continues to fascinate us. Every month that goes by reveals new treasures buried under the desert sand. This fragment of nose was found in the area during an archaeological deal, so it was stuck back on. It hadn't gone far. Temples, Pyramids, necropolises, and ancient cities are just some of the wonders. The bear witnessed the splendor of past pharaohs and their heirs. The Greeks used to make cakes called pyramids. When they came to Egypt, they found colossal stone structures in the shape of their cakes, so they gave them the same name. This ancient civilization was thought to have been lost, is constantly reinventing itself in the Egypt of the 21st century. We are going to travel through time and space to rediscover it. The cult of death played a crucial role in ancient Egypt, with its necropolises, pyramids, mummies, and sarcophagus. 3/4 of archaeological discoveries on Egyptian soil are directly linked to funeral rites. The ancient Egyptians loved life so much that they hoped to be able to enjoy it even after their death. They would mummify themselves to make their bodies last forever. Their burial places were built like dwellings, with the walls painted in colors associated with life. But that was not enough. The deceased also had to appear before Osiris, the god of the dead, who would judge their actions and decide whether or not to grant them eternal life. This age-old notion of judgment after death has not disappeared in Egypt. Both Christians and Muslims hope to be among the chosen few when the final judgment comes. Today, as in the past, death is not seen as an end for believers. In Luxor, the wedding season has begun. Couples marry in the shade of his ancient Egyptian temple. It is the start of summer when temperatures rise to over 45 degrees. Integrate to protect themselves. People start work very early in the morning. This is the best time of day to spread the word. Trucks like these, with the makeshift loudspeakers, are often the only link between small neighboring rural communities. Caliph Mahmud, Caliph Hazanan has departed. May he rest in peace through the mercy of God. He is from the village of Nayeseki. His burial will take place at 3 o'clock before afternoon prayers. I am announcing the death of a Muslim to villagers. I am making this announcement so that everyone in the surrounding villages knows that this person has died. If I don't announce it through the loudspeakers, no one will come to his funeral because no one will have been informed. I've been doing this for 25 years, but it is not my real job. My real job is to do the call to prayer at the mosque. I was chosen because I have a good voice. Allahu Akbar is my job. And pray for the dead. If they do, they will be rewarded by God. But it is important for the deceased too, as we say here. If 40 people pray for the deceased, they will definitely go to heaven. Caliph Mahmud died in the night. In accordance with the Karnak tradition, he will be buried the following day. This man was held in high esteem. His friends gather outside his house to pay their last respects. Inside, his family is watching over his corpse. In keeping with tradition, it has been wrapped in a white shroud. The adult males in the family have washed and embalmed the body. He is ready for his final journey to the village cemetery. If Caliph Mahmud had lived in the age of the pharaohs, he would have been mummified after his death. Mummification was a much more complicated process than embalming. The ancient Egyptians believed that there was life after death in their own bodies. To see mummies today, you have to travel to the capital. Most of them are to be found in Cairo. Hidden away in the center of this sprawling city, this old museum is their home. The museum's incredible collection still attracts just as many Egyptian maniacs as ever. But the undisputed stars of the museum are the mummies. Some are over 3,000 years old and incredibly well preserved. The bandages have been removed to show off the bodies. That practice dates back to the early days of Egyptology in the 19th century. Nowadays, out of respect for their ancient religion, the mummies are left in their original state at the museum's laboratory. Not a day goes by without Professor Merman, a distinguished specialist in the restoration of antiquities, handling the mummies. Once they're out of their sarcophagus, he never touches the cardboard casing. It is the final protection before the bandages. Here we have a mummy and a wooden case, shaped like a human body. Thanks to the funeral mask and the X-rays, we have been able to confirm that this is the mummy of a young woman. She was about 22 years old when she died. On the X-rays, we could also see that she had a fetus between her legs, so that tells us about the possible cause of death. Given her age, there is a strong possibility that she died of a miscarriage. The mummy is in perfect condition, as are the drawings on the case. Some are very rare here. For example, we have the god Canoe standing in front of the young dead girl. It is magnificent and very rare. The origins of mummification are due to chance. 6,000 years ago, Egyptians used to bury their dead in ditches in the desert. They noticed that the sand acted as a very good preservative. Later, their belief in eternal life forced them to find more effective processes to preserve the corpse in the best state possible. For the rich, bombs, spices, and vitamin were used. Once the entrails had been removed, corpses was soaked for 70 days in natron, which is a natural salt which absorbs humidity. All of these products cost an absolute fortune. This is another very rare piece. It is the left arm of a pharaoh, King Yunus, from the 5th dynasty. It was discovered by French archaeologist Gaston Maspero at the end of the 19th century. Later, researchers carbon dated the ark. The results confirmed that it came from the Old Kingdom from about 2350 BC. Damnations under the microscope revealed the presence of the resin and linen used during the mummification process. This is hard proof that mummification was already being practiced at that time, but the technique was not perfected until the days of the New Kingdom in the 18th and 19th dynasties. The techniques of mummification in the 19th dynasty was so effective that 3,200 years after their death, we can still put faces to the names of the major figures in Egyptian history. People like Seti I and his son Ramesses II, one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, who reigned for 67 years and died at over 90 years of age. The practice of mummification carried on for centuries and was adapted by all of Egypt's various invaders. Hey, dear mummy, we are working here on a very special, a mummy with a portrait from the Roman era. These are called for you mummies, and they existed between the 1st and 5th centuries AD. This one is very special. It is drawn on a red background. There are only 20 like it in the world. The idea behind the funeral masks covering the faces of Egyptian mummies is that they restore the use of the senses to the dead person. At the end of the Old Kingdom, the masks were replaced with portrait traits that came straight out of the Greco-Roman artistic tradition. These portraits were commissioned from artists by the living in anticipation of certain death. It is hard to know exactly when mummification stopped, but there were no mummies between the 5th and 6th century AD. That date corresponds to the rise of monotheistic religions, which forbade this practice. In the region around Luxor, Caliph Mahmud's remains have reached their final resting place, the cemetery in his village. Only the men take part in the funeral procession. According to the Prophet Muhammad, the hyper-emotionalism of women and children would disturb the sobriety of the funeral. In the Muslim tradition, the burial must take place within 24 hours of death. This is a precaution which makes good sense of these latitudes. The corpse must be carried over a distance of 4 kilometers in temperatures of 45 degrees centigrade, in the shade. There is only one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Chants, the crowd swelling as the procession reaches the corpse's final resting place. If the hills overlooking this tiny village cemetery could talk, they would tell us how little these rituals have changed. The Theban hills have seen thousands of funeral processions pass by since the days of the ancient Egyptians, with over 600 tombs recorded. You need a bit of help to find your way around. Summer, Michel is a tour guide whenever he comes to Luxor. He finds time to visit Aman's bookshop that specializes in Egyptology and is situated in the midst of the ancient ruins. I accompany groups, and I guide them through Egypt. I tried to pass my love of all things Egyptian onto you. Have to keep your knowledge up to date. There are new discoveries every year and new theories. This is my passion, so I tried to stay up to date. To do that, I need books, and I need to read. Even for an avid reader, it would take several lifetimes to uncover all the secrets hidden in the Theban hills. To help make sense of it, Egyptologists have divided the necropolis into 3 parts: the Valley of the Nobles, the Valley of the Queens, and the Valley of the Kings. There are images of funeral processions on lots of graves, but Summer has decided to come to the Valley of the Nobles with its monumental staircase. The tomb of Ramesses Ovizia under Amenhotep III and Akhenaton is one of the largest in the area of an acropolis reserved for nobles. At the back of the tomb, Sammy finds what he's looking for, an image of a funeral procession that is 3,000 years old. You can see the family members walking together behind the pallbearers. Next, you've got the bearers of the grave goods. Grave goods are the treasures that are placed in the tomb alongside the deceased. The deceased hopes to live the same life after death as they lived on earth, only better and more carefree. So they will need to eat and drink and entertain themselves, but they also keep the same job as they had on earth. So they will need the tools necessary for performing those functions. Here, for example, you can see a leopard skin, which was the attire of a high priest. Rames was a high priest, so he needs a priest's robes. Then there is a bed, a mattress, a headrest, and some boxes. These eclectic grave goods had only symbolic value. They were purely functional. When Howard Carter opened up Tutankhamun's tomb in 1921, the world was amazed to discover the wealth of this young pharaoh, who died at the age of just 19. Nothing had been forgotten, even his chariot was buried with him. In total, Carter unearthed 5,000 objects from the tomb, estimated to be worth the equivalent of $1 billion. But in the great majority of cases, the grave goods have long disappeared from the tombs of the pharaohs, stolen by generations of grave robbers. And here we have the mourners. The mourners were very interesting. Here you see women showing their grief and their sorrow. You can see black tears on their cheeks. Their eyes were heavily made up with coal, so when they cried, the coal ran down their cheeks. The tradition for mourners hasn't completely disappeared from Egypt, but Islam forbids the expression of grief through loud wailing. Professional mourners resisted for a long time, but today it is only in remote villages that the tradition persists. This scene of a funeral procession is on the side wall of the vault. As you can see, it is dug out of the mountainside. This ramp leads down to the vault. The mummy and its grave goods were slid down the ramp and placed in the burial chamber. Today, as in ancient Egypt, after the funeral procession, the corpse is laid to rest. Cut off. Mahmud's burial is over. It is time for the village of Mam to recite the prayer of the dead. Prayer reminds us that death is part of life, and that the deceased will get his due reward on the day of the resurrection. The congregation stands to listen to this final oration, and again, like a top of the fast woman, hire to do Mia in a mental. Throughout the centuries, from the Egypt of the pharaohs to that of Alexander the Great, funeral rites have continued to evolve. Islam too has undergone a transformation over the course of history. One city in Egypt that single-handedly embodies this mixture of genres is Alexandria. The city that was founded by Alexander the Great has retained its cosmopolitan character. Here you see signs in many different languages: French, Greek, Arabic, and Italian. The city is a thriving Mediterranean port, so its 5 million inhabitants have watched people come and go since the days of antiquity. This melting pot of a city has always had its fans. People like Doa, a tour guide who specializes in Egyptology. When I was young, I often used to come here with my family during the summer holidays. We would spend our summer holidays on the beaches of Alexandria. The beaches have gone, sadly. They are rapidly disappearing. The sea level is rising, and concrete boulders are strewn on the beaches in an attempt to hold back the sea. I love Alexandria, and I keep bringing tourists here. Sometimes Alexandria is not on our itinerary, but I always try to add it. Alexandria is steeped in history. Besides the lighthouse, which has disappeared but was once one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, another archaeological treasure lies hidden in the heart of the city. Discovered in 19 by accident when the weight of a donkey caused the ground to cave in, the city's ancient catacombs revealed a whole other world, the world of the dead. It is accessed by a spiral staircase and is arranged over 3 levels, 35 meters underground. Visitors find themselves stepping back in time to the Egypt of the 1st to the 4th century AD, with its cosmopolitan funeral customs. And here, we are at the bottom of a well. It was down this shaft that the sarcophaguses containing corpses or mummies were lowered into the various levels of the catacombs, and this is where the digging stopped. The spiral staircase would have continued down here, but in 392 AD, all pagan cults were banned, and Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. So digging was stopped because these rituals were no longer going to be practiced. The catacombs of Karmal Shakafa, to use the Arabic name, are a veritable maze. They contain over 300 Greco-Roman tombs, the majority of which are loculi. These burial niches are identical to those found in the catacombs in Rome. The tomb, which best symbolizes this mixture of cults and rites, is also the first one to be built here in the 2nd century AD. Here we are in the original tomb where the catacombs began. That is the statue of a man. The body is Egyptian, but the head is Roman, with curly hair and everything. It shows a fusion of art and religion, which is very typical of that era. I'm talking about the 2nd century AD. First, you've got these composite columns, which are typically Greek. And then over here, you've got this Agatha demon, which is typically Greek, but the double crown is Egyptian. And above it is a circle containing a Medusa, which is for the protection of the tomb. According to Greek mythology, Medusa has the power to turn anyone who looks at her to stone. Then the center is very Egyptian. Here, you can see a winged sun with a cobra on either side of it, and then this line of cobras, which was very typical of the time, and also a symbol of protection. Here we come to the main tomb. It was dug out of the rock along with the lid. The lid does not open. The burial was performed from the back, from outside the chamber. And here, we have a carving of Anubis, the ancient Egyptian god of mummification, who was the guardian of the tombs. He's depicted here as a legionary in a Roman style that has nothing to do with Egyptian art. Today, as in the past, once the funeral is over, the family sits down together to eat. The architects of the catacombs thought of everything. This large, typically Roman room with its U-shaped bench serves as a dining room. The whole family would assemble here. You have to imagine a wooden table over there, with waiters passing behind it. Family members would lie on their left-hand side to make room in their stomachs. They could fill it to maximum capacity. It would have been wine to accompany the meal. The idea was to share one last meal with the spirit of the deceased. In ancient Egypt, it wasn't unheard of for the mummy to attend this last meal before returning to its grave so that it could enjoy the spectacle and the feast. Either the oldest son or a priest would perform the ritual of opening the mummy's mouth. It was a magic ceremony that would allow the deceased to breathe, eat, hear, and see in the world of the dead. You were supposed to break the plates. You would eat enough when you left the tomb. That is an Egyptian tradition which was practiced in the age of the pharaohs. The tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered thanks to the unearthing of pieces of pottery marked with his name. These had been used during the last meal his family ate with him before shutting up his tomb and leaving. I want you to know you Muslims still hold funeral banquets, but there are certain conditions. 3 days after Caliph Mahmud's burial, the period of mourning is officially over. The family can finally eat a meal in his honor. It takes place in the cemetery. It is a frugal and hasty repast, with just one dish served. Caliph Mahmud's body now lies in the ground. His soul will be judged on the day of the resurrection at the end of this world, a last judgment that is customary of monotheistic religions. However, in ancient Egypt, the deceased were judged immediately. Once they were alone in their tomb, they would descend into the underworld to be judged. Their life would continue there, provided they passed several tests first and found a way to survive in the afterlife. That was no mean feat. At the small temple of Hathor in the Theban hills, Egyptians have inscribed instructions on the wall for the newly deceased. For the ancient Egyptians, death was just a way of passing from this world to the next. And for such a journey, people needed a guide to tell them about the different stages they would encounter. This is one of those stages. It's the weighing of the heart. It's in chapter 125 of the Book of the Dead. The heart is placed on one dish, the scale, and on the other dish, there is a quill pen. It is the quill pen of Mart, the goddess of justice. And the heart had to be as light as the feather the scales had to balance. If the heart was as light as a feather, that meant the deceased had a clear conscience and could enter the field of reeds, which was the ancient Egyptians' equivalent of paradise. The weighing process is presided over by the god Osiris. If the heart is found to be heavier than the feather, then it will be eaten by a beast known as the devourer, and then the deceased really is dead. Being dead means not being able to continue living in the afterlife. The deceased, depending on their means, had the papyrus placed alongside them in their grave. It was a guide to their journey. Having their guide with them gave them peace of mind. It gave them the formulas they needed to overcome all the obstacles they were going to encounter along the way. For the dead to take a survival guide with them into the underworld, they needed a medium for those written instructions that was easy to carry. Over 5,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians invented papyrus. The papyrus plant was the emblem of Lower Egypt. Images of papyrus plants were often seen on the walls of temples and tombs. This aquatic plant grew wild in the Nile Delta. Today, it is still grown by some farmers, but harvesting it is not easy. This type of farming is hard to mechanize. The farmers harvest it by hand, their feet in the water. For Sabi and his son, Muhammad, it's hard work. Muhammad, bring the cart. These scenes look so timeless in reality. The cultivation of papyrus completely disappeared from Egypt in the Middle Ages. And yet, papyrus had been a luxury product the Egyptians had a monopoly over throughout the Roman Empire until it was supplanted by parchment. Today, and this is very recent, it can be found in some fields again. Papyrus is a plant that the ancient Egyptians grew long before us. There was nothing much growing on this land, just some very standard crops. But a few years ago, we decided to plant papyrus again. In the 1970s, some Egyptian botanists started to show an interest in this plant. Legend has it that they reintroduced it after bringing home some plants they found deep in the heart of neighboring Sudan. Once the plant had been reintroduced, the farmers had to revive the methods of the ancient Egyptians to transform it into a material you could write on. I'm just cutting up the papyrus stems, which will be used to make the sheets of paper. I'm cutting them into different lengths to allow us to make sheets of different sizes. Probably go ahead. Now, I'm slicing the stems with a fishing line. I judge everything by eye. The slices need to be identical, more or less the same thickness. The thinner they are, the more beautiful the paper will be. Once they're moist, the strips of papyrus need to be aligned and carefully placed on top of one another so that there are no holes in the sheet. It is a job that demands a lot of dexterity. Doing this, I realized that the technique the ancient Egyptians invented was incredibly sophisticated. For me, with modern methods at my disposal, it's less hard, but for them, it must have been very complicated. No one knows the exact process the ancient Egyptians used to make papyrus. Do they use a press like Sabi? It's hard for archaeologists to answer that question. But Sabi's papyrus looks like dense coils the papyrus that the ancient Egyptians placed in their sarcophaguses. Look how solid this leaf of papyrus is. You can fold it and unfold it again, problem, it won't break. It is more solid than a sheet of normal paper. And what's more, it is light and transparent. I sell these sheets to printers or to artists who decorate them and sell them to tourists. Painting on papyrus takes a very special kind of skill. Artists who do it, like Amit, are real experts. Be on it. What I could do better. If drawing on papyrus is harder than drawing on traditional paper, because you can't just rub it out and start again. Having worked as the official artist on a number of archaeological digs, he turned to this discipline, which took him back to ancient Egyptian times. I am not an archaeologist, but I can tell you about the art of the ancient Egyptians. They used deep colors and applied several layers of paint. That is why their paintings are so magnificent. They used natural pigments, not chemicals like we use today. They loved bright colors and fixed them properly to the wall. The drawing was very precise. I am interested in all of them, the line drawings, the fixing process, and the pigments. And I try to imitate their art as far as it is possible to do so. Color was very important for the ancient Egyptians. Their temples were completely covered with paintings, giving them a garish aspect that they no longer have today. The reason for this was that the fairest subjects were illiterate. They had to be able to recognize the gods at first sight from their colors and costumes. Osiris was painted green, the color of spring, to show that he had overcome death. These painted representations are not lacking in realism, as shown in the difference in the skin color of the two sexes. The men are brown because they live outdoors, and the women are yellow because they stayed shut up indoors. The animals too, are represented in a way. This is very true to reality. They will be used by the deceased in the afterlife. Who would want we to pay limitation of a Nile perch? Applying thick paint like this tires your hand out. It's not easy imitating the ancient Egyptians, but it's fascinating. Work more often, and I derive a lot of pleasure from it. Painters, stonecutters, and sculptors occupied an important role in ancient Egypt. In the Theban hills, in the Middle Kingdom, they even had their own village, Da el Medina. All the artisans lived together here, building tombs for the pharaohs in the nearby valley. Their own tomb reflected their craft too. They are topped with little pyramids, imitating early royal tombs, a symbol of ancient Egypt. The 3 pyramids of Giza were erected during the Old Kingdom in about 2600 BC. Back then, only the pharaoh had access to eternal life. The pyramid was a sort of launching pad for his soul to join the stars. But paradise gradually became accessible to everyone. Every Egyptian could have a pyramid built in line with their means. At Dar el-Medina, Seligem, chief artisan to Ramesses II, didn't hold back when it came to constructing a tomb for himself. He topped his with a pyramid and paintings worthy of royalty. Summer's favorite thing here is the painting of paradise, done by Chenna Gem and his contemporaries. What is so distinctive about this tomb are these vignettes from the Book of the Dead. This one is of what we call the fields of Eru, which is what ancient Egyptians hoped to find in the afterlife. They namely very fertile fields where the wheat grows to heights of 3.5 meters, and the flax is 2 meters tall. It's a place of abundance. We see them here working on the fields. That will be one of their jobs in the afterlife. On Earth, they had to dig canals and build dikes and so on. And in the afterlife, it's exactly the same. And so they invented a system to spare themselves this drudgery. These funerary statues were known as Ushabti. They had a magic spell cast on them to make them act on behalf of the deceased and go to work in their place. You cannot compare heaven as we think of it with today's mentality to the way it was perceived for 1,000 years. For the ancient Egyptians, heaven was a place of transition from life on earth to the afterlife, which was everlasting and carefree. The Egyptians believed in heaven, but they also believed that the dead came back to visit the living. The Ba embodies the soul of the deceased. It is represented by a bird with a human head. The Ba is a sort of double for the deceased that is set free after death. Like a ghost, it leaves the tomb and flies over the deceased's favorite places, allowing it to participate in life outside the tomb. Then the Ba flies back into the tomb and settles on the mummy. In modern-day Egypt, it is more the living who visit the dead than vice versa. Egyptians often pay their respects to their dearly departed, but the resting places of the dead are sometimes disrupted by daily life, especially in the country's capital. In Cairo, the population density is 10 times higher than in London. The population has forced many inhabitants out of the city. Cemeteries. The people of Cairo are used to this strange cohabitation. It is not unusual for them to use a grave as a tea tray or washing line. A whole way of life has developed around these tombstones. Hazen is a glassblower, and he lives in this working-class district. No one bats an eyelid on seeing this awesome working here. His workshop opens directly onto one of the graves. Hashem's family has lived in the cemetery for several generations. He is familiar with the habits of all his neighbors, both the living and the dead. That's Hazen Arabesque, and Hazen Arabesque is me. Hassan has built his own tomb on the family plot, near to his parents' grave. It is not unusual for Egyptians to build their tombs while they are still alive, just like in the days of the pharaohs. Personally, I have no problem with that. If I look back, I have lived a good and full life. I have restored my ancestors' tomb, and my children will be proud of what I have achieved. What's more, it's handy. My tomb is a mere stone's throw from my house, but I have to admit, it's nicer here than where I live now. Obviously, not everyone wants to live in a cemetery, but if you fall on hard times and you need somewhere for your family to live, especially your children, at least you can always move here. You get used to living among the dead. In ancient Egypt, the afterlife was not always as peaceful as it is now. At the bottom of the Valley of Kings in the Theban hills, generations of grave robbers, attracted by the buried treasures, came to disturb the resting places of the dead. But the pharaoh I from the 18th dynasty was the victim of another form of tomb raiding. He was subjected to a campaign of damnation because of a rather troublesome forefather, Akhenaten, the pharaoh, who was hostile to the god Amun and a heretic in the eyes of some of his successors. I paid dearly for his kinship with your cursed pharaoh. His tomb was methodically ransacked. You don't need to be a great detective to see that King I was murdered in his tomb. The heart has been removed from these images of him. And don't forget that the heart is the conscience, the penis too preventing him from reproducing, and the face which is his identity, so that he is no longer recognizable, then the hands and so on and so forth. And so, this mutilated king no longer exists, because the ancient Egyptians believed in the magic power of the image. If the image of the deceased was intact, they existed, but if it was erased, they ceased to exist. The idea was to kill I even after his death, to erase all trace of his existence, even in his tomb. Now, he will never be reunited with his soul. When his soul returns to his tomb, he will no longer be there. Only then is he really dead. As you can see, they have hammered out the name of the king, which was written on this cartouche. The ancient Egyptians believed in the magic power of the word as well as of the image. Erasing his name meant that he no longer existed, so he was killed one more time. They hammered out the name, but they didn't succeed in eradicating him completely. 3,000 years later, I'm still saying the name I. And so he exists. His name lives on. And so those who tried to kill him failed. Sama can name this pharaoh who died 3,000 years ago, thanks to the work of archaeologists. By solving the mystery of the hieroglyphs and identifying the mummies they discovered, they have ensured eternal life for the ancient Egyptians. But they are not the only ones. The whole world has contributed. From visitors to the Egyptian Museum to tourists in the souk in Luxor, everyone is contributing to the eternal life of the pharaoh subjects. And never mind that the pharaoh who has benefited the most from the helping hand of fate is one of the least important pharaohs in the history of Egypt. He died at the age of 19, and his power was very limited. And yet, not a minute goes by without someone, somewhere in the world mentioning the name. Tutankhamun, the most short-lived of the pharaohs, will have enjoyed the most enduring posterity. 3 centuries after the first discoveries, Egypt continues to fascinate us. Every month that goes by reveals new treasures buried under the desert sand. The fragment of nose was found in the area during an archaeological dig, so it was stuck back on and hasn't gone far. Temples, pyramids, necropolises, and ancient cities are just some of the wonders that bear witness to the splendor of past pharaohs and their heirs. The Greeks used to make cakes called pyres. When they came to Egypt, they found colossal stone structures in the shape of their cakes, so they gave them the same name. This ancient civilization, which was thought to have been lost, is constantly reinventing itself in the Egypt of the 21st century. We are going to travel through time and space to rediscover it. Ancient Egypt gave the world its most extraordinary monuments. Its 3,500-year-long history was brought to a brutal end with the triumph of Christianity in the 4th century. But this extraordinary civilization did not disappear, for all that. In the 19th century, when Jean-François Champollion solved the mystery of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, architecture, necropolises, shipbuilding, and the Coptic language of Egyptian Christians all have their roots in this ancient history. Modern Egypt is the daughter of ancient Egypt. The city of Cairo, with its 16 million inhabitants, stretches as far as the eye can see in this month of June. Despite the sweltering heat, the fog of pollution hanging over it seems less thick than usual. It is the middle of Ramadan, and the city is operating at a slower pace. There are just a few people out shopping for provisions, getting what they need for when they can break their fast at dusk. Around 95% of Egyptians are Muslim. Islam is everywhere. It is part of everyday life. Witness the crowd assembled at the foot of the Al Hussein Mosque in the city center. Thousands of worshippers are gathered there, waiting for evening prayers. The meals have already been dished out. Everyone is waiting for the call from the muazzini. Once he has said, Allahu Akbar for the 3rd time, fasting ends, and iftar begins. Yeah, 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 yeah. These scenes may seem timeless, but the Muslim religion didn't arrive in Egypt until 640. A day in the grand scheme of this ancient civilization, that's relatively recent. Its cultural roots lie in far more ancient fertile ground. It is a very visible heritage in Giza, on the outskirts of Cairo. The ancient Egyptians built what the rest of the world still considers to be the emblem of the city, the pyramids. These vast tombs were built during the Old Kingdom, over 4,500 years ago. They are real architectural feats. The Pyramid of Khufu is 147 meters high. It is the highest in Egypt and the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world to have withstood the test of time. The Pyramid of Khafre is almost as high. The site of the pyramids has been visited by millions of tourists since ancient times, but also numerous heads of state. Doa is a French-speaking tour guide. She got the chance to give François Mitterrand and Jacques Chirac a guided tour. Whether you are a president, a head of state, or a simple worker, the pyramids never cease to fascinate. The first foreigner to visit the pyramids and to describe them was Greek. He is known as the father of history. That was Herodotus in 430 BC. The word pyramid, now used to describe these monuments, comes from the Greek word pyramis. The Greeks used to make cakes called pyramids. When they came to Egypt, they found colossal stone structures in the shape of their cakes, so they gave them the same name. And the pyramid shape is itself sacred because it mimics the sun's rays, which cover the earth in the form of the pyramid. That's why the king, who is considered to be the incarnation of the sun on earth, wants to be buried inside this sacred shape. The right to be buried in a pyramid was reserved for pharaohs and their wives. Even princes and princesses didn't have that right. However wealthy they were still buried in what we now call mastabas in Giza. The guardian of the pyramids is just as famous as its prot-gs. The Sphinx has watched over these royal graves for over 2,500 years. This lion with a human head is 74 meters long and 20 meters high. It's a pretty dissuasive protector. We are standing between the paws of this famous Sphinx, whose facial features are those of Khafre, who built the second pyramid. This pink granite stele between the Sphinx's paws commemorates a dream Thutmose IV had in the 16th century BC. The Sphinx is embedded in the sand, and Thutmose was chasing desert animals. He fell asleep in the shade of the Sphinx's head, and dreamed that the sun god had appeared to him and spoken to him, saying, "If you get me out of the sand, I promise you the throne." He woke up and told the story to the priests, who believed him and started digging the Sphinx out of the sand. That's proof that the Sphinx was continually being embedded in sand, and then dug out again. It was also dug out in the time of the Greeks and the time of the Romans. And when Christianity became the official religion of Egypt, this site, like any other site, became a pagan site and was completely neglected. So the Sphinx was buried in the sand again, and that's what protected it. The Copts were the first to stop mutilating the Sphinx's face, and then the Arabs followed. Still, there is a legend or a story which says that during the Mamluk dynasty, Selim al-Dar thought the Sphinx was a pagan statue. He came and mutilated the Sphinx's face and broke its nose. It wasn't Obelix who broke it. Today, the Sphinx is still the world's biggest sculpture to be carved from a single block of stone, but building the pyramids required millions of blocks of stone. Some came directly from the Giza plateau, whereas others came from a quarry that is still visible today, about 10 kilometers from the pyramids on the outskirts of Cairo. The Mokattam Hills still bear the scars of being used as quarries by the pharaohs. Some stones came from much further away, thanks to a natural transport link. The Nile, 700 kilometers south of Cairo, the city of Luxor, formerly known as Thebes in the days of the pharaohs, is also home to a gigantic monument. Karnak Temple, like the pyramids, took an impressive number of stones to build. It is the largest religious complex from antiquity and covers a surface area of 2 square kilometers. For the fun, working alongside the Egyptian counterparts, a team of French archaeologists are reconstructing parts of the temple under the direction of stonecutter and restorer Antoine Garrick. The statue of Tutankhamun has been here for about 3,500 years and has seen better days. It is cracked. We don't know why, and it is missing certain elements, no doubt after being coupled or looted. But what remains is in incredibly good condition. The missing piece of nose was found nearby 10 years ago during a dig and was stuck back on again. Soon we're going to take the statue down to replace the missing parts that have been patched up with cement. That was done in 1912. I think they used what they had at their disposal at the time. It's a prominent statue of a famous king in the middle of Karnak Temple, so it's an interesting project, and it's important for the history of the site and for Egyptians that this statue is exhibited in the best condition possible. We're going to take the whole thing apart to replace these two missing parts with beautiful carved blocks and new stone, recreating the original form of the statue. The restoration of the statue is designed to be completely reversible should the missing part of Tutankhamun happen to be found one day. Work has already begun on the restoration of the pharaoh's torso and his left leg. Antoine Garrick is working on a block of sandstone that is very similar to the sort used in antiquity. It's a soft stone that could be carved in ancient times without the use of iron tools. Iron only arrived in about 600 BC. Before that, the sandstone could easily be carved using wooden mallets and bronze tools. The work I'm doing obviously uses modern-day tools. We could have had fun doing it with ancient tools, but it would have taken 10 times as long. That's known as experimental archaeology, and it's done with a specific goal in mind. That isn't the goal of this operation. To get the finish on the sandstone, you can simply use another piece of sandstone when it's dry. It works very well. The two stones abrade one another, and you get this fine dust. A very smooth finish. As you can see, it's very effective. I might carve the stone with modern tools, but I finish it off with this to give it the exact same finish as on an ancient statue. Antoine's team is working on the statues, but it is also responsible for storing the walls in the secret courtyard in the middle of Karnak Temple, whose decorations date from the times of Thutmose I. The team has already reconstructed the east wall, and now they're tackling the north wall. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle with blocks of stone weighing several tons. Antoine is assisted by Mohammed, an Egyptian stonecutter, who was trained by him. I've been doing this job for 10 years now, and I still have a lot to learn. I don't think I'll finish my apprenticeship before I die. There is nothing nobler than working with stone. There is so much to learn. It's humbling. I know I'm still a beginner in this profession. In Egypt, there have been so many archaeological discoveries that stonecutters have several generations worth of work ahead of them. But some of the buildings that seem to be complete at first sight are actually very incomplete. The three big pyramids are a good example. None of them has retained their peak. This is the pyramidion, which is meant to go on top of the pyramid. This block of stone is original. It was found buried in the sand during a dig, and it is the tip of the pyramid. On the pyramid of Khafre, you can see a substantial part of the cladding. It has lost its tip, but you can still imagine what these pyramids looked like when they were complete. They must have been beautiful and impressive. Nowadays, it's hard to imagine the initial impact of the Great Pyramids. They must have been majestic, clad in sparkling white, and perfectly smooth. But for the past 4,500 years, they have lost some of their splendor, like most monuments from the pharaonic era. Jean-François Champollion, the great French Egyptologist, came to Egypt in around 1830. It is estimated that 70% of what he saw and described at the time has now completely disappeared. The reasons are multiple: erosion, earthquakes, the Nile floods, and especially human intervention. For years, the pyramid was used as a quarry, and that's unfortunately how it lost its cladding. The cladding disappeared, along with a large part of the base. Muhammad Ali, king of Egypt in the 19th century, was very proud of himself for having built a dam north of Cairo using the cladding from these pyramids. Successive generations have come and helped themselves to these pharaonic monuments. Even in ancient times, some pharaohs reused the monuments of their predecessors. Then the Greeks, Romans, and Christians also got their stone supplies from these ancient relics. Egyptians, the majesty of Muslim Egypt, was also built using debris from the pharaonic reign. In Cairo, the founder of the Mamluk dynasty in the 14th century had a huge tomb built. This mausoleum might never have seen the light of day without the involuntary help of the ancient Egyptians. This is a blatant example of ancient stones being reused in the Mamluk era. You can see the sun god at the top of the cartouche. It's not incidental,